Hey everyone, it's Terry with Terry's Tidbits. I am so glad to be back getting a video ready for you guys to help you understand flow. I had such good intentions last fall to get this series, Fundamentally Flow, all put together for you. And life happened and it got messy over the last, 4, 5, 6 months, whatever it's been. So my apologies for not getting this out to you sooner. But today, the video that we're going to walk through is all about working with data. And so I've had the blog post written for a long time. I haven't released it yet because I didn't have the video for it, but we're going to do the video right now. Let's take a look at all things related to working with data. Hey everyone, it's Terry with Terry's Tidbits. I am so glad you're here. So we're going to jump right in to a flow, and this happens to be a screen flow that we've got up on the display right now. And we're going to simply add our different elements related to working with data so that you kind of get an understanding of what they do or how they work. The flow itself isn't going to do anything special, so don't worry about the use case per se. It's really mostly just to help you understand the elements themselves. So the first element that I want to introduce to you is simply the get element. And the get element allows us to query data from Salesforce. And you might think, whoa, Terry, that's kind of a developer-y word, query. I'm not a developer. It's okay. You don't have to be a developer, because if you can create a list view in Salesforce, then you're going to be just fine with this element called the get element. I'm going to click on the plus sign here. And if I scroll all the way down, I get to the pink elements, and the pink elements are the main ones that we use to interact with the database in Salesforce. These are the ones that we want to be careful about. We want to minimize as many of our use of these as much as we can within our flow, so that we don't go back and forth to the data any more often than we need to. So we're going to start with the get. I'm going to select that, and it's going to throw the configuration screen here on up for me, and I'm going to call this get positions. You'll notice that it creates for me my API name, and then I have the option here to choose the object that I want to get data from, or the object I want to query data from. I'm going to query the positions object, and I can start typing that in. You'll notice that as I type things in, the objects that match what I'm typing kind of narrow into my search. So that makes it really nice. If I'm not 100% sure of the name, I can simply start typing and it will bring to me the name that I'm looking for. So we're going to choose position. Now, as soon as I did that, as soon as I clicked on that position, the screen opened up and I see a lot more information now here available to me. Get used to that with Flow, because it does this everywhere. When you click on something and change a value, it could change what you're seeing and the options that you have to select from. It's just a part of the way Flow works. Now, as I get into the filtered position records, position being my object that I just selected, this is where it's just like your list views in Salesforce. I'm on an object, a tab in Salesforce, and I can create a list view that grabs any of the records within that particular object. And that's what this is going to do. All I need to do is put my criteria in. The fields are going to be all the fields related to the position object. And if I scroll down here, I have a status field, and I want statuses that are open. And I can add additional fields. So maybe I also want to see where my status is filled. Positions is simply an object that we have defined in this particular org. Think of HR department and recruiting, where you've got positions that are opened and some that have been filled, some that are closed, that sort of thing. That's what this object is. Now, if I wanted to have both open and filled objects come back into my database, I will need to adjust this condition to be an or condition. So my status can be either opened or filled. If I scroll down a little bit further, I have the ability to adjust my sort order for this. If you need to do that, you can certainly do that as well. And now we get to this section called how many records do you want to store? And Salesforce introduces kind of some new language here for us. And I want to introduce this language to you maybe in a little bit different manner. We're going to use a simple deck of cards. And what I will do with this deck of cards, I want you to think about each card here representing a record in Salesforce. So here's an ace, a heart. We have a 2 of hearts here. These are records. So think of them as a record inside of Salesforce. Now, I've got this big pile of records, which is my entire database. And when I have more than one record in a variable, and remember we talked about variables in the last session, this variable would be considered a collection. It's a set of records with multiple records. This is a record. This would be a collection. Collection is simply more than one, or it has the ability to store things more than one. So if we come back to our get element, if I choose that I want to only select the first record out of this query, then it's going to create a record for me. It will come back as a record variable. If I choose all records, which is what I'm going to do, it's going to come back to me as a collection of records. And so I will have that distinction between a record versus a collection of records. And now, if you are brand new to Flow, we come to the next section, and I would just want to make this as simple as possible for you new people. How to store fields, automatically store all of them. There's nothing wrong with choosing this. If you're brand new to Flow and you want the simple answer, this is your easy path. Now, as you get more advanced and more comfortable using Flow, I would encourage you to start to switch to some of these other options. You'll notice that if I choose the second one where I get to choose the fields, Salesforce does everything else. It opens up another new section on my form, and I can pick and choose now the fields that I want this query to return inside of my flow. So that is my second option. I like this in that if I have a record that has a ton of fields on it, I don't need a ton of fields. If all I need is just a couple fields, then this is a more efficient query to simply bring back what I need. Now my third option is what I kind of fondly refer to as us control freaks choice. It's the more advanced one. And here I get to choose the name of my collection. So in this case, I don't have a collection created, so I'm going to do a new resource. This is like creating a new variable now. So I'm going to create a variable. I'm going to call it a collection positions. And I'm going to give it a record type of, or data type of record. The object is going to be positions. So that means that I'm going to select this checkbox here that allows me to store multiple values. And you see that they do mention the word collection right here. So that's that term that we were referring to with the deck of cards. Just simply means I'm going to hold more than one. This variable, collection positions, it's a record type, it's a data type of record, and it's against the object of positions. That will come back. That gives me the ability now to control the name of my collection. And I have the ability to also control now which fields I pull into this collection for each record. And with that, I can continue there, or I can go back and let's just go with the simple solution. It will give me a warning that it's going to remove all of what I just did. And I can then select done. And now I have my get positions. Now this get positions is going to be a variable. You can see that it's called called out over here, positions from get positions. That is a record collection that we just created by configuring the get element. Now the next element that we're going to talk about is not technically one of the pink ones. I know I said pink is what we're going to deal with, and that's generally where you're doing some your manipulation where it's working back and forth with the database. But maybe I don't need to go to the database. Maybe I just want to work with some variables that I've already got pulled into my flow, and I just need to make some adjustments to them. Now in that scenario, I'm going to use what's called an assignment. And I like assignments because assignments give your variables value. They, if you define a variable, go back to my variable presentation where I talk about variables are simply drawers. And if you think about a sock drawer is it's defined. Its data type is socks, so you can put socks in that drawer. But until that drawer actually has socks in it, it really is undefined. I mean, it doesn't have any value yet. So assignments allow us to give value to our variables. It's like putting socks into our socks drawer so that when we need them, we can go back there and get those socks out of that drawer. So let's take a look at this particular option. And so let's click on that little plus sign again. And just as a reminder, again, just saying it one more time, that this float is a meaningless flow. We're just kind of looking at elements, so we're pulling things on just so that we can kind of play around and configure them. So I'm going to call this one assign, and let's call it open counts. And so I've got now my assignment is named. But now I can come down here to the variables, and I can now set values to those variables. Now I don't have any variables that I've created yet, so I'm going to create a new resource. Remember, resources are things that we create and then can use. And one of those resource types is simply a variable. I'm going to call this variable number open count. And I'm going to have this be a data type of number because we're just going to count the number of positions that are open with this particular process. It does not need to have any decimals, and I can put a default value in here. Now, when I click into that, it gives me all of these other things, but you can still just simply type in your default value there as well. I don't need this variable to be a collection. It's just going to be a single value that it's going to store, and I'm going to go ahead and click done. And now I have the ability, you can see my variable there, I have the ability to choose the operator that I want for this. Now I can set this variable just purely to a number if I want to. I could set it to add a value of, let's say 1. Let's say I was in a loop, and you're going to see this in a little while. The next session will be on loops. Maybe I'm inside of a loop and I just want to increment this variable by 1 every time the element gets passed through within that loop. Then I could simply choose this add option. I can subtract as well, so add or subtract. I could set it equal to, and in that case what this will become is the ability to look at another collection, and it will tell me how many records are in this collection. So it would set number of open count to the number of records that it pulled in this particular collection. You'll notice here that it does not give me the option to simply choose a record variable, because a record is always 1. We would never need to count a record. But it is a record collection because a record collection can be more than 1 value. So that's why those variables then show up for me. So a really good use case for assignments might be something like this. Let's assume that the position object, we want to have a button, a custom clone button on our position object. Let's just take the existing record that we're on, and clone it and create a new record, but we want to tweak the values, some of the fields, when it creates that new record. So let's take a look at what that would actually look like. I'm going to delete this get statement, and I'm going to come over and I'm going to create a new resource. This is going to be a variable. I'm going to call it record ID. The data type here is going to be a record data type because this is going to store the current or the record that I'm on. If I'm in Salesforce, I'm on a position record. It's going to store that record's information into this variable called record ID. And this will be positions. It is not going to be a collection because if I'm on the record, I'm just going to pass a record in. It's just a single record. I'm going to go ahead and say done. Oops, I missed one thing there. Sorry, let's jump back over to that. That was record ID. I forgot I need to make it available for input. Input simply means that I can pass from my screen or from another flow, I can pass a value into this record. In programming language, we'd probably call that a parameter. But all it is it's simply a way to pre-populate this variable from when you're coming to it from outside of this particular flow. Output does just the opposite. It means I can push it out from the flow. So there's my variable, record ID. And now let's do an assignment. On position. And I am wanting now to set up another new variable. And I'm going to call this variable var cloned position. It's going to be what becomes my new cloned record. It's also going to be a data type record, and it's going to be on that position object as well. It does not need to be multiple records. It's going to be just a single one. And I don't need to push it outside of the flow. I don't need to retrieve it from the flow from another location either. This is all going to be happening right within this flow. So the available for input or output are not needed on this particular one. So now I have this variable, and if I click back in there, you'll notice I get the little arrow next to it. That simply means I can click over into that and I see all of the fields for that object that we just created, or that record. I'm going to select some of these fields. I'm going to add a handful of these to our screen just for the sake of time. It'll move a little bit faster. And I'm going to say clone position, and let's do the field date, var clone position, posted. And I'm just grabbing all the fields. Since we're going to clone this record, we're going to need to do something with all of these particular fields. And I think I had hiring manager was my last one. We'll go with name, clone position. And this is the method in which you do this, totally up to you. I just find it faster if I have several of these. I want to just run through and get them all added, and then I'll come back and I'll set their value status. Okay, so if I'm creating a brand new record, my date field needs to be null, or it needs to be empty. So in that scenario, I'm simply going to leave this field blank. The date field, oh, that's my duplicate in it. I created, let's get rid of one of them. There we go, date posted. That's going to be today's date, and I can get today's date simply by going to flow, the $flow variable, and say current date. My hiring manager, I'm going to set that to the same as my existing record. We're not going to change our hiring manager when we're cloning it. And so all I need to do now is go to my record ID, the one that we passed values into. So this is the current record that we're looking at on a screen that has this clone button. I can click into that and just say, hey, let's set it to the same as our hiring manager. I want to go all the way down to the hiring manager field, not the one that is the related list here. that related one will take me into this field of that particular hiring manager. I just need the ID. Position name, we'll go back down to our record ID variable, and we will grab the name field. The owner of this is also going to be the record ID, and it will be a user. So let's go down and just simply grab that owner ID. And then our status, in this case, our status is going to be open. If we're cloning it, it's a new position. It doesn't really matter what the current position is. If the current records, excuse me, we want our new one to have an open status, and I can simply say done. Now that created for me a new variable called variable clone position. And so if I want to now add this record to Salesforce, I simply can go in and we'll do the create record option. So create record element, we're going to call that create clone position. How many records do I want to create? Okay, so here we go back to that concept of record versus collection. If I have a 1, I want to create 1 record, then my variable right down here at the bottom of the screen, the only thing I'm going to see are records, single records variables. I can't scroll through here and find anything that's a collection. If I wanted to do multiple records, now you'll see this becomes a record collection choice, and I can only choose now my collections, the ones that have more than one. I'm cloning just 1 record, so I just simply will go to that and I will choose my variable called cloned positions, and that's all I need to now do with this particular create records. I've already defined all of my fields. I can simply choose now to create a record based off of the one I just cloned. Now this option here, the second one, this one allows you to choose your object, so in our case position, and when I do that, I then get a list of my fields. So this method, basically what it's doing is it would allow us to eliminate the assignment variable in our use case. So because I could come here and I could choose my date field, my date posted. I won't do all of these. I'll just stop here with hiring manager so you get the idea. Date field would be empty. My posted date would be today, which today was inside that flow, current date. And my hiring manager, I'm going to set to the same as my existing record. So I'll simply go down and choose the hiring manager. I would repeat that for all of the fields. This is a really cool way to do it simply because I don't then need to have an assignment. And anytime you can have fewer elements on your page or within your flow, that's a good thing. So this would be a great way to do that. Sometimes it won't work based off of your use case. Sometimes you need the more flexibility that you get with the assignment. But this is another option that allows you to get away with having a single element to clone a record versus the use of the assignment. Once we're done, we can set done. That's going to create our record for us. Now that I've created my record, let's just assume that I need the ID of the record that we just created. Maybe I want to navigate somebody over to that record or whatever, but I need the ID. And to get the ID, it's actually going to be stored in the record that you created this from. So in this case, it was clone record position. That's the record here that we used to create our clone. The ID is actually now going to be in the cloned record field. So if I take a look, let's go into like an assignment here. Actually, let's not do it as a, let's do it as a screen. We'll just do this, and then I can go on my screen, do a display text. And I know we've not talked yet about screens, but really the only reason I'm doing this is just to show you the fact that we do get the ID back from that created record. So here is my created record. We called it clone positions. And I can simply scroll down here and grab the ID and have that be on my page. We'll just call this test for now so that we can get something there. Very bad job on my part there for naming, but if I were now to run this screen flow, first need to save it. I'll do a debug. And with that, I should be asked for the record ID. So let's just grab the first one here and say run. And you'll see right there, that's the ID now of my new record. Now in that last section, we talked about a lot. We covered assignments and we covered the create record concept. So that element, we've got that one covered. The only element now that we have left that I want to cover is the updating records. And so let's jump back over to our flow. And I've cleared it out so we have nothing sitting here. But let's go ahead and let's create another variable. We're going to do that record ID variable again. So record ID, it will be a record data type, and the object will be position. And I'm not going to store multiple. It will need to be available for input. We'll click done. We're again going to assume that this will be placed on a screen, that then when it's called, it will assume that record ID, this record ID, will be the record that represents the screen that we were on. Now, if I want to, say, update a value or update a field on that record, then I simply can go in to update records. Now, you probably wouldn't do this one in a screen flow unless you had some other things to do. You probably this is a better scenario as a record trigger flow, especially a before record trigger flow or fast field update. But let's assume we want to do an update positions. And here I've got now two options. I've given it a name up above, but I've got two options here. How do I figure out or find the record to update and set its values? And with this option, I have here the lookup to a record or a record collection. Now, my record is the record ID. And if I wanted to update something here, I have to make sure that the record has an ID. Now, I just pulled this from the screen I was on, so the record on the position screen. So it is going to have an ID, otherwise it's not going to be able to find anything. And it will now just simply save that record again. Now, in most cases, you probably would have an assignment where you're manipulating that data before you come in here and simply run an update on the collection. You'll notice I don't have the ability to manipulate the values of that record in the screen when I'm using a record or a record collection. So any manipulation of that data would have to happen in an assignment prior to getting here. Now I could choose the second option, which is specify conditions to identify and set each field individually. So in this scenario, let's choose our position object. And I get this filter. So this is almost kind of like the querying data or the get element where I have to define which record I want. So let's assume I want all of the records that, let's actually go with status. Let's say I want all of my status records that are equal to pending. And maybe I want to change that pending status. Maybe I want to set it to open. I can do simply a single element, one update option, choosing the specify conditions to identify records, and then set them all in the fields individually. So it's my position object. I'm grabbing all of the records where the status is pending, and I'm changing the status field now to open. I can click done, and when that executes, that's going to update all of those records for me. So 2 ways that I can update records, and this screen adjusts based off of which one of these you choose. Now, we covered a lot in this particular video set. We talked about the get, we talked about assignments, we talked about creating records, and we finished up here with updating records, and it's a lot of information. Read the blog post. Hopefully between the two it will start to make some sense to you. The next session that we're going to have is going to be on loops, and we're going to be back using the deck of cards and a game that will help you understand loops. So stick around for that particular video as well. Thanks for watching. Have a great rest of your day.